Hi everyone, delonewolf here. Welcome back for another EVE Online discussion video. In today's video, we are going to take a look at the monthly economic numbers for EVE Online that have been released for last month, the month of July. As always, if you want to read this for yourself, I highly recommend that you do. You can go to eveonline.com, you click on the news link, which brings you here, and then you will find the monthly economic report for July 2021. This one should be pretty interesting. We definitely have a couple of things that happened in July. First of all, we had like the rumblings of what was happening with the war, and then we've got the money printing that CCP has done by providing Omega accounts with ISK tokens that basically just turned into liquid ISK in the game. And then I think we got the Grand Heist patch as well that lowered the taxes. So lots of monetary stuff, and then the war, of course, that could potentially be pretty interesting. And let's start with this one, production versus destruction. Always a pretty interesting chart. And number one, let's start with produced, which is the red line here. You can see that after the April massive bump from, let's say, 3 trillion right here, a little bit above that, we end up to 4.5 trillion, so a 50% increase, and then we dropped off to 2 trillion, which is another 50% decrease. Compare that to the 3 trillion if you take that as a baseline. It's a little bit of a steeper slump and a less high peak, but overall I think that's a pretty fair. And you can see that right at the tail end here we are starting to move back up. Now this is not entirely unexpected. I think that summertime is ending by the end of July, and I think this chart actually goes up into the beginning of August as well. So we do have potentially the end of the summer slump. We got a little bit of hype with what was happening with the war, of course, with the Imperium basically surviving the assault, their enemies retreating, and then all of the propaganda that happened around there. I do think a bit of a motivator for people to come and take a look at the game, to come back to the game, to take part in all of that action. And then, of course, we've got this like, you could say 1.5 month period where we overproduced massively, trying to make as many battleships, capital ships, super capital ships, everything that was big, that was going to change with the industry changes, was just massively overproduced. That might slowly be starting to be absorbed by the rest of the market. So hopefully we are going to continue on this upward trend. I think it would be good news if we could get back close to that 3 trillion ISK, maybe even a little bit above that. We can clearly see right here from the period here that, you know, if we can get above 3 trillion, we're basically back at a normal output, which honestly it doesn't necessarily mean that as much stuff is being made, but stuff that's become more expensive, of course, could mean that we can get there pretty easily. But it would be healthy for the chart, I think, and for people not getting the vibe that EVE Online is dying all of a sudden, although we definitely had a pretty severe summer slump. Then next we've got destroyed and mined. You can see that destroyed starting to pick back up here again at the tail end, going into August as well. Obviously tail end of the war, you know, lots of keep stars being blown up now by the Imperium from their enemies, clearing their space again, and I'm sort of expecting that this could start to go up here as well on a rebuilding effort from the Imperium to, you know, get their space back up and running, get all of those structures back out there. And then of course the factories in the Imperium will probably start to go full bore as well for their revenge campaigns. And then mined is not very high, which is kind of okay. I think price wise, you know, titanium dropped off a little bit, but everything else is actually high too, in a pretty normal average place. And then you know, to see this decline again with a bit of a rush in April, kind of normal during the summer months. But yeah, that increase in production here to me is a good first sign. We'll see in the upcoming months how high it can go. Then what I want to take a look at as well, we'll take a quick look at total value destroyed by region. So Lone Trek and Delve, then the Citadel, which is Jita, then we, no, the Forge, yeah, that's all around Jita, obviously, those two. Veil of the Silent, actually quite a bit of destruction in that nullsec system, where mostly Fraternity, I believe it is, a Chinese focused alliance, is doing a lot of economic work as well. So overall, yeah, I feel like this looks quite okay if Delve and Veil of the Silent can actually compete with like the Forge and the Citadel. That's decently high amounts of destruction in the game. We also saw destruction going back up there. Then we get total mining value by region. That could be pretty interesting as well. We still have Veil of the Silent as number one, but 1.1 billion or 1100 billion, I think, in all likeliness. It's okay. It's, I mean, for being a nullsec region, it's quite a lot. But you know, compare that to what's being mined in Domain, which is a MAR region, lots of high-sec systems. That's also over 1,000 billion, and this is at the low end of what's actually being mined. Then we got the Forge Metropolis. In's Mother, I'm not sure if that's potentially nullsec as well, but yeah, Domain, Forge, Metropolis, Lone Trek, all of them still at the front. So lots of mining is still being done in highsec. I also think that that's lots of players active in order to get that done. So overall, still quite okay in my book. NPC bounties by region. I definitely prefer these charts where again Veil of the Silent is number one in the amount of PvE that's being done out there. Next up, the Kalevala expanse, don't see that there very often. Then In's Mother, Tenal, all of them at around 1,000 billion, and they are at 1.8 thousand or 1,800 billion, 80% more than the next region, something like that, 70-80% more. It feels like, yeah, there could still be some automation, but to me, if you are like the most organized group in nullsec that's not that involved in the war, this could be doable. You know, if you can actually assure enough safety for your group with not too much disruption there, this doesn't feel completely out of line to me personally. Then we get total production by region. The Forge still number one, 15,000 billion, so that's Jita and around, of course. Then we get Delft number two. I think here that could become interesting to see how this number evolves as again we get the rebuilding of the Imperium. Then we get a Citadel right next to Jita, Lone Trek, and Veil of the Silent again doing quite nicely, but here, you know, you're not seeing some completely outrageous amount of production compared to everyone else. This again feels in line with what's definitely possible. And yeah, I kind of want to show that as well here. Delve, maybe twice what is in Veil of the Silent, but you get two sides building there, of course. Both the attackers and the defenders through the month of July, trying to get as much stuff on the field as possible, and so you get a lot of production there. So again, to me, this does feel a lot better than when they're doing 3-4x of the next nullsec region. That does feel kind of shifty. This one here, to me, feels like it's quite okay. And then if you're interested in potentially spotting stuff around the war, you will want to take a look at the trade balances. I'm not going to bother doing that, but know that there's quite a few players that are looking at this and you know, seeing some proof, if not at least some indications that a part of the retreat from the attackers was done way before it was all announced. And of course then you get all the nullsec politics coming into play of who actually betrayed who knew before who, threw who under the bus, and all of that good stuff. Fascinating to read, but I'm not going to go through all of these numbers. Total market value by region, no surprise that the Forge with Jita is still by far the largest one. Then we get Domain, a MAR trade hub getting to 40,000 billion, and then Delft, Sync Liaison, Lone Trek, Metropolis, Heimatar, you know, the other trade hubs. So that's quite normal without Jita. Oh, we actually... Oh, that's contracts. Don't we usually follow this? Yeah, excluding the Forge, there it is. So we get Domain heading towards 40,000 billion ISK. I would say that a MAR is definitely not declining massively. This was something that was feared when a MAR basically became a very far away place from the largest trade hub from Jita itself, that it could wither and die. I don't see it growing explosively, but it's holding its own quite nicely, and I made a video about it last week as well, taking a look at PI and minerals there. It has this unique situation where it is in a MAR space. Most high-sec systems are available there, so if you're looking for that quiet home, you basically have a good chance of finding that in a MAR space. And it seems that, sure, they've got some lower prices in a lot of these categories, but that also seems to attract enough players that that market is definitely not declining, perhaps growing a little bit more slowly than what I would have liked to see. But that could also depend on price, because I do think that Domain, for instance, is heavily still producing and reliant price-wise, value-wise on stuff like titanium, HiSec minerals, PI materials, easy to make PI materials from HiSec. And so this could be deceptive in my opinion, whereas Jita will have skins, Plex, all of that stuff massively dominating its trade value. Domain could be growing in stuff, but not necessarily in value as quickly as some of the others. So to me, also making a lot of sense. And then of course we've got the faucets and ISK sinks, and that could be kind of interesting. We are seeing commodities market booming to 35 almost trillion ISK coming in here. I think this is what will include the ISK tokens that CCP gave out during the that logging campaign for Omega clones. Bounty prices 18.5, incursions 14.3, then redeemed is, oh no, they're actually separate. Oof, this is on top of all of that. Redeemed ISK tokens, 9.4 trillion ISK just dumped into the game. This is a month's worth of the ESS, like 2/3 of a month of incursion ISK. So, you know, players saying this is like a tiny drop in the bucket. All of that was done in like a week, and I think even the largest one, the largest amounts won't even show up on this one if I read that correctly. So yeah, there's actually a lot of ISK that was floated into the game by CCP, going from 1,300 trillion to a little bit above that. But yeah, it's 96 trillion in faucets, 54 trillion in ISK, and active ISK delta losing a little bit more. This is like bans, inactive players, all really depends. CCP has a methodology for this one. But yeah, take away that 9.4, you go down to like 86, then that 72 down, it's a little quite a little bit less, so quite a bit of growth coming from the money printer on this one. Let's see if we get the top six commodity faucets, if we can see stuff here. Sleeper components still by and large the biggest part of the commodities market, doing quite nicely. Overseer effects all the way back down here, Triglavian data, and they didn't put the ISK tokens on this one. So on this chart you can see that the overseer effects are up a little bit. Triglavian data is up a little bit as well. Miscellaneous bounty, or is that, oh, it's probably the yellow one, marked as miscellaneous in all likeliness. That's the big boom right here, the ISK token that they released for the daily logging campaign. Well, it's, you can see the amount, it's not really completely negligible. Sinks over time, let's see if we got anything interesting here. Maybe we'll take a quick look at that. Yeah, there it is. All of a sudden, the redeemed ISK token shooting up above the commodities market, above the bounty prices, and then the corporate payouts. Okay, ESS update is here. Transaction tax change, that's important as well. Of course, this one changed, and you can see that as a result, ISK flowing out of the game is definitely slowing down and coming in line with brokers' fees, skill, and purchases. Where before, you know, here you can see the tax change introduced, everything pretty much in line, but below $500 billion, and then this really brought us towards $1 trillion on heavy trading. But in the last couple of months here, 6 months or so since April, we have a pretty sizable reduction in, oh well, April again makes sense with the industry changes, a reduction in trade as well, as players I think are just gonna sit on their positions a little bit more with like, especially for the big stuff, with everything being so so expensive to make at the moment. Everyone is just, you know, not really willing to get rid of carriers or anything like that through market transactions, and so all of the transaction taxes are way down as well on lower velocity. So the one thing that I want to say about this is that this will definitely create a little bit of inflation. I'm really curious to see in ETH talk if we can spot where that inflation is going to take place. I am a little bit afraid that we won't see it because it will be in carriers, super carriers. Well, we saw how expensive freighters are now, and titans and officer mods and things like that. And really for the end game players, everything is going to become more expensive. But you can also, in my opinion, see in this the problem with this inflation is that it makes the value of everyone that already owns carriers, titans, super carriers, and that type of stuff so much more expensive, and it is going to make it a lot harder for newer players, newer groups to build up towards challenging them. And so the value of all of that stuff goes up. Most of inflation goes into commodities, especially the hard to get stuff. And so yeah, their power structure basically becomes a lot more valuable, and this while transactions are going down, and it's harder for the newer players to get into this. So I do think that this could have adverse effects. And that monetary roach motel could be a reality as well. If CCP decides, hey, this is great, we're actually seeing nice numbers when it comes to what this ISK is doing, and players get addicted to it, you could end up in a place where eventually stopping such influxes of ISK could become very detrimental to the game. But you know, eventually we'll have to swallow that pill if CCP decides to go this road, of course. And that's what they've done, partly at least. We get the money supply that was definitely starting to decline a little bit, should back up, which should mean higher prices, mostly in characters, a little bit in corporation, but yeah, this is those ISK tokens coming into the game. So the experiment itself is going to be very interesting. And what I'm also a little bit afraid of is that this will seem like very good news to CCP. The velocity of ISK is actually going back up. So that means that there's more ISK trading hands, more trading happening over the course of the month of July. But what's going to be hard to gauge is this the ISK that they made, or is this the tax change that they made? And I think it's definitely the second one that is dominating here. But if you make the mistake of thinking, well, printing ISK increases the ISK velocity, you know, that's how you may end up into that mindset that, yeah, this is the right thing to do, when in fact it could end up being the wrong thing to do in the long term. As I said, I do think that monetary inflation is going to reward the established players rather than get new players in. So we will see, but very interesting to see that massive change here with the money supply going up and then the ISK velocity going up as well. And it's going to be a little bit of both, an ISK injection into the game, and then the tax changes, of course, that have made it easier, less costly to do trading. Then we've got the economic indices. We are going to take a look at that. And yeah, the one thing that is a little bit worrying in that sense, although you could say that's maybe good news for newer players, is that the mineral price index is really not normalizing. It's staying at around 200. It's actually going back up a little bit at the tail end. Lots of minerals are very expensive at the moment, and that's just the reality. But I think if this is what CCP is doing now, creating ISK, lowering taxes, you're going to see high prices for these minerals stick. Primary production index is dropping a little bit, but I think that always lags behind. So you can see this increase here with this peaking of the mineral price index. I think this one will always lag behind mineral price index. So next month could be very interesting to see if we're going back up on this increase as well, which could be a sign of inflation. And then we've got the secondary production price index that's for this year is starting to trend back up a little bit as well, but mostly hesitating, which has been good for the Tech 2 market, where I've been able to find some, like this is a bottom, and we're probably going to not really break through that because of production costs are pretty stable, and then the high price on a bit of speculation, being able to buy low and sell high in a predictable way has been doable with this pretty stable, I would say, secondary production. And then the CPI itself, yeah, I think this has been explained a couple of videos ago, or a couple of economic reports ago, and that this is massively dominated by stuff like skins and plex and things like that, that it's not really too good a measure for like ships or anything like that. So unfortunately, that one is up a little bit, but pretty stable, looking like everything is quite affordable, but that's a little bit deceptive in and of itself. And then anything else? No, after that, we've got the decomposition of all these indices. Some of these charts may still be pretty interesting to people that really want to have a deep dive into what's happening in the economy. I mean, it looks great. All of the data is literally available here, so you can do as much analysis on this as you want. But for me, this is enough to get a good feeling as to what's happening and to look at what may be happening in the future. So I am looking at potentially more production happening with the Imperium, probably having to do quite a bit of rebuilding and then their preparation for war. Undoubtedly, that is going to happen. The tax changes have started to increase velocity. It's a lot easier to trade at the moment, although margins have very quickly basically narrowed to the new tax reality. But then, of course, the ISK injection was actually pretty massive. You can see that here, and you can see that here as well. It's basically an extra blue line in the top 5. That's quite significant, and I'm curious to see if we will spot where the inflation potentially will take place, and of course what CCP's idea is around injecting ISK directly into the game. If they're going to keep doing that or not. Is this a one-off? Is this part of an experiment? I hope that it was a one-off. I personally don't want to see that in a sandbox game, but if they do decide to go that road, well, we have all of the data, and the impact of such an experiment could be very interesting as well. And this is why we love EVE Online, of course. It's the most complex sandbox out there, in my opinion, and a lot of fun to just be a small part, a small cog in the machine, but to see everything that's happening and how everything is interconnected. And that will be it for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and as always, I'll see you next time.